Hello and welcome to Border Crossing, essential information and opportunities for international businesses with Chip Hobecker. These podcasts are designed to help you get a better understanding of some of the most important current issues and problems that affect businesses. Chip will examine the key points, help you to see the advantages and disadvantages, and provide you with any help sheets and support that you need. And just so you know, Chip heads up both the consulting division and the turnaround and restructuring practice for the firm Raymond in the US. He has served as a court-appointed receiver, a chief restructuring officer, and as a fiduciary in international, federal and state proceedings in the US. He's also a board member for the National Association of Federal Equity Receivers, where he heads up the International Committee, and he's a fellow of Insol International. If you want to get in touch with Chip, he can be contacted via the Raymond's website or on LinkedIn. We hope you enjoy this podcast. Hi, Chip. How are you?
I am good, Becca. I always feel like we should be wearing island shirts with some kind of fancy, colorful floral pattern or something when we talk about these sorts of things today.
I know, because you have managed to get yourself chairing, very unfortunately, a conference in the Cayman Islands. Poor you. That must be a tough gig.
Work is a burden, but it's one that I embrace.
Yeah, I can see that. And I like the fact that you've got your Cayman Island picture behind you as well, with a beautiful sunset there, which is tempting in itself. I just can't see the cocktails at the moment, Chip.
They're there. They're just off out of sight, just a little bit.
Yeah, just making sure. Sure. So why don't you tell us what the conference is and where and when it is?
Sure. So this is the NAFER International Committee annual conference. It is in the Cayman Islands this year at the Westin on 7 Mile Beach. For those who are familiar with that venue, it is 7 Mile Beach itself is one of the so-called most beautiful beaches on the planet, just extraordinarily clean and soft. As a matter of fact, I have gone snorkeling and the water is so gentle there that you can actually fall asleep snorkeling.
Wow.
It's just really very, very comforting. I don't have a problem sleeping many places, I suppose, but that's a pretty neat deal. The hotel itself is also extraordinary. A couple of great restaurants there, restaurants up and down the beach, and the Cayman Islands, if you haven't been there, it's really one of the jewels of the Caribbean. Virtually no crime. It's very, very well kept and just a fantastic spot. So we're really looking forward to having the group in there. It is the end of February. Generally speaking, folks will fly in on Thursday, February 22nd. There will be a cocktail party and a dinner that evening. The 23rd will be the actual day of the conference. The conference will wrap up around 4:15, 4:30 or so, and then there will be a sunset catamaran sail with drinks and light hors d'oeuvres. And
it's sounding awful. I'm so glad I'm not coming this year, Chip.
Yeah. No, it's always one of my favorite catamaran rides. If you've been there before or you do it again, you will certainly hear them when they chug out to sea, gather everyone around, saying, okay, it's orientation time. One of the most important things is we have a list of who's on. So if you do happen to fall overboard, it's important that you really wave your hands and be noticed. Yell out your name so we can scratch you off the list.
That's if they're not pushed, yeah.
Yep. Every year somebody drops their phone over the side and waves goodbye to it.
The reading glasses.
Yeah. So there's a host of fun things, but it's a beautiful sunset. 7 Mile Beach faces the sunset. So every night is just an amazing piece of art. Sometimes there's weather that rolls through. You can see forever, so you can see lightning up in the clouds off in the distance. Just a very nice setting for this. So it's a fantastic conference in its own right. You add to the setting, though, there's just not a lot of places where you step out of the conference room to grab a quick coffee break and you're minutes away from or steps away from the ocean.
Are you on commission with the tourist board or something? Cayman Islands. I think you got a second job going on here, Chip.
Well, just like you, our climate in February in Michigan is one that doesn't make this a very difficult sell.
No, I see your grey skies often when we talk. But yeah. So give us an overview of what it would do for an attendee. So why should I go?
Yeah, so NAFER itself, for just a second, the National Association of Federal Equity Receivers. This is the who's who's, the master's and doctorate level educational group of people who take fiduciary appointments in America and the people who support them. So the receivers, the attorneys, the banks, the auctioneers, the forensics people, valuation, everything that's involved in that industry, including the regulators and oftentimes some of the judges that appoint receivers. So that's the group we're talking about here as an organization. And the folks we're talking about that will be at this conference are the people that deal with cases that have international tendrils. So hedge funds that have assets in various places, or maybe they're managed in different places. There's any number of possibilities there. That'll be the NAFER cadre. So those are people who take appointments that have cross-border interests or activities. Those attorneys that help them out, the auctioneers, again, the forensic people, the IT people, all the different folks that are involved in servicing those will be from the U.S. side, but then we'll also bring in a huge international cadre. And that's really how this all got started. It was the idea of helping the U.S. domestic people become better friends and get to know the foreign professionals, so that even when we have cases where we're adverse, there's a base of a relationship there.
Right.
You've got people on the speed dial, you can text them, you can reach out. It's just as much faster and easier. We see some of these big cases where it seems like the first step before anything gets done is a protocol takes a year and millions of dollars of professional fees to get accomplished just to know how the fiduciaries from different countries will work together. And sometimes it has to be that way, but lots of times, if you do come to the Cayman Islands and you go up to the north side, there's a great place called Calypso's with a sticky toffee pudding that's the best in the world. And you'd be amazed how much you can get done involving international cooperation over a black coffee and a bowl of sticky toffee pudding.
I do not doubt that.
You would not. And so that's really the who should come. Anybody who does this stuff, right? Anybody who deals with troubled businesses, cross-border stuff. We've had folks from South Korea, from Italy, the UK, all over the Americas. We've had people who've tried to come from Australia and been thwarted by this or that. So we've had just a huge variety of people over the years, and I can tell you, everyone's happy they came. They learn a lot because we present current real issues in a scenario format where people have to troubleshoot live, and there's actually arguments between attorneys and fiduciaries on different sides of issues. So you can really tease out what's going on. And for people who maybe aren't exposed to this very much or to one nuance or the other, they get to see it play out in real time, and it gives them a real opportunity to see the players. They get to hear about perspectives of what this court or that court might say or might feel, the risks you have in this jurisdiction or that jurisdiction. Just a huge variety of really interesting activity. And because we use this scenario format, it's kind of fun. You usually have a bombastic attorney or two who can make very good arguments. And when we do have judges there, occasionally we have them rule on these things. And because they're not on the bench and they're not going to be appealed, they're free to
do what they like.
Have some license with their decisions too. Yeah. So there's really some fun to that. And we do try to create these scenarios to really tease out the issues and really expose the nuances, which I think the biggest takeaway that people have going back to their individual practices is now understanding more about what happens down the road. It helps them more appropriately start cases correctly. They dodge some pitfalls that you often have without this kind of information.
I mean, I came to Miami last year, and even as somebody who doesn't work in the sector, but just to see what was going on, the two things that really struck me was the quality of the people there. I mean, it really was the best people around the place, and they were all so enthusiastic about it and very up for meeting each other. And also the scenario and just what you said about everybody getting involved. I mean, they really did. They were really getting quite competitive about it, actually. It was really interesting.
One of the favorite scenes from that conference that I remember is during the second or third coffee break, there was flow charts and case information up on the overheads. And there was several groups of attorneys and bankers and whatnot who were gathered around looking at these things closely, their arms waving, debating positions. And on their break, they were still going at it, just like they were arguing a real case somewhere.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. They really were getting very involved in it. These conferences are great, but do they lead to work for people? Have you ever had any work out of any of these conferences?
Tons. So the first conference we had was in Cayman, and I forget now what year it was, probably 2016 or 2017. But I think we identified 13 pieces of business that came out of people meeting people in that conference.
Wow.
We all have clients with stuff going on, and sometimes we're not quite sure what to do with it. And so you meet people, you hear things that just ring a bell, where it's just right on point with the facts in your case, and they've got a solution or an idea that you hadn't thought about. And so you connect the dots. And so, we, even in this Zoom world, even as we've gotten so much better at being remote, there's still an element of must be present to win. And so when you're present with people, you spend dinner and a cocktail night with them, you spend all day in the conference, you have a catamaran cruise. There's a lot of interaction time. There's lots of times for me to come up next to you and say, I want to really pick your brain about something. You seem like you're in the asset tracing world. And I've got a client with a problem. It's been around for a while. We're not sure what to do. And that person you talk to has ideas. And so, we've seen a lot of different things happen, just generating right at the conference. We've also then seen situations where somebody gets an appointment down the road a year or two, and they need counsel in Cayman or South Korea or wherever.
Yeah.
And they've met people. And so that's intuitively their first phone call is to someone they actually know. And so that's part of the power of this, is just, making sure that you're networking. And for our friends who are not from the US, there is no greater collection of the movers and shakers and US appointment takers that deal with international stuff than will be in Cayman on the 22nd and 23rd. If those are people that you need to meet and get next to, that's where they're going to be.
Yeah, and the social aspects were great. I mean, I got to meet absolutely everybody at the conference. It gives you so much access because there's quite a lot of social activity built in, as you say. So it was very good for that. So if you were going to give somebody the one big reason to come along to this conference, what would it be?
The people are going to meet. I mean, that's the number one thing. You're going to make connections. You're going to have relationships. You're going to actually see people in their element. And so you get a feel for how they fit with you. They'll get a feel for how you fit with them. That's the biggest reason. As I say, there's very few times that this group of people is in the same place at the same time. Now, they're there at the annual NAFER conference, but they're also there with several hundred people who don't do international stuff. So it's harder to kind of pick and choose. This is really a distilled group of the cream of the crop.
So Chip, explain to me what the sort of format of the content is. We talked about the conference, but what about the content?
Sure. I'm glad you were there last year, because you'll help me communicate this well. It's a very different format than the normal conference. The normal conference, you have 3 or 4 speakers, 4 or 5 panels during the day. Great information is disseminated. We do it a little bit differently here. We actually create a scenario. And so for this year's scenario, the simulation is based off of a fictional company that 5 friends started years ago. They created a South Dakota Topco. Each of the friends was in a different big geography. So one's in Dallas, one's in Cayman, one's London, one's Singapore, and one's Johannesburg. So we got the continents covered. And they started off pooling their own personal money, flipping things, trading on the margins. So trading, foreign currency exchange margins, working interest for various natural resources like oil and gas leases, things like this. As it goes along, they made a lot of money. They had friends and family that started wanting to get in, so they pulled it. It grew, continued to do well, and eventually took it public and took in public donations. So they are registered with the SEC in the U.S., Cayman, Cayman, registered in London and Singapore, not registered in Johannesburg, interestingly enough. As time goes on, they begin to have a little bit of trouble meeting redemption requests. Some of their assets are longer term. Some of them are just bad bets and they lose money on. So they take out a large line of credit and they use that to mitigate shortfalls when they need to. That line of credit is at the top level in South Dakota, but it's cross-collateralized supposedly by everything in the portfolio, whether it originates in any of those different geographies. As crypto comes along, they really get heavy into crypto. And so where a scenario comes in is they're defaulting on redemption creditor requests. And so there's parallel proceedings impending. There is a winding up proceeding being contemplated in Cayman. The SEC and CFTC in the U.S. are looking at these operations. And internally, they start doing a little poking around, and things are awry. There's money missing that they didn't know was missing. And it's clear somebody or somebodies are taking money out of the till. So it's not just the normal problems, but there's actually somebody in this that's taking money. So yeah. So as we play this out, the scenario starts with an introduction. We go a little deeper into those public facts. Tables are set up into characters. So one table will be the Dallas outfit, one will be the Cayman outfit. We'll have an SEC table, we'll have a CFTC, a lender table, creditors, whatnot. And there will be an initial kickoff where there will be a race to the altar, if you will, to see who can file first, to try to determine, who's going to be in control of this proceeding. Is it going to be handled in Cayman? Is it going to be handled in London, in the U.S.? What's interesting about this is there's also the question of where's the assets located. And of course, crypto doesn't have a zip code.
Yeah.
And so that's a different calculus than normal. So there's this initial scrap over who's going to be in charge, who gets what assets, probably a race to grab assets and try to claw them into this proceeding or that proceeding. And the first hour or so will end with the filing of those proceedings and give really the next 20 minutes of break for hallway negotiation to happen, see if deals can be made, if partners in crime can happen, all those sorts of things. And then we'll start with some motion practice in that second session where there will be some motions and maybe there are motions to approve deals. Maybe they're going to be scrapping over who's in control. But the scenario will play out with somebody being in control. And then there will be these asset tracing issues where there's a whodunit theme throughout it, where again, remember there's money missing. And even the five people are looking at each other saying, who did it? Who did it. And so it's a little bit like a murder mystery dinner, right? Nobody knows. Yeah, they may not even know themselves. But there'll be an asset tracing component through it. There'll be elements that are unique to cryptocurrency. There'll be some working interest type things that are unique to oil and gas type activities coming out of the Dallas office. The second and third segments of this are going to be issues around that, where again, there's going to be competing interests. There's going to be people who maybe have security interests versus unsecured people, depending on which proceeding you come in. Your rights are going to be better or worse than they might be somewhere else. And then it really is going to culminate in the fourth scenario, which is going to be heavily dedicated to distribution schemes. Depending on how the scenario plays out in the beginning and who's put in charge, that'll drive a lot of the distribution scheme issues. But these are real live things right now where, if a U.S. SEC receiver is doing the distribution, that scheme looks significantly different than a Cayman liquidator or someone necessarily from Singapore or Johannesburg. And so you have some differences there that for some people might not matter very much, but for other folks in the case, the difference between getting money and not getting money. So these all play out through the end of the case. And we will, regardless of who's in charge, we'll do a nice job describing how the distribution schemes work and why it matters and what it looks like, because those are really live issues. And earlier when we were chatting, we talked about, what's a big takeaway for people. Well, understanding why it matters whose distribution scheme you're going to use plays into the early part of the case when you make decisions about who's going to be in charge and, what you do there, because that right or wrong choice in the beginning of the case greatly impacts the end of it. So that's the scenario. That's the sort of stuff we're going to work our way through. The participants always throw me for a curve. This is an open thing, so they may have some different ideas. They may greatly disagree with my ideas. Whoever acts as the trier of fact may make judgments that are out of left field that impact everything, but all stuff that practitioners deal with all of the time. One of the interesting things about whenever a judge makes a decision, somebody's unhappy. And so, maybe we'll have a judge make sure everybody's unhappy in this case.
So tell me, where do you think up these ideas? Is it in the bath? Do you sit down with your mates?
so it's a combination. There's a committee. So we have an international committee at NAFER. There's, I don't know, 15 or 17 people on it. And so typically, I start off by making a list of what I think are some of the hot current events, the sorts of things we might talk about in panels. And then I think about, okay, what would be the scenarios in which these things would be applicable? And that starts to frame up, some of the elements of the case study. I think about the jurisdictions and how they might interplay. And so I usually will dummy up that part of this where I start off with how we're going to create a simulation, and it's heavily drawn on existing things, right? There's a lot of these large landmark cases where you can pull different elements out of and borrow fact patterns. And so I draft that, and then I run it in front of the committee, and the committee edits me. It's mostly lawyers. They're very good at redlining my work. And so
you should know never to put anything in front of lawyers.
No, I do all the time. It gives me better results, but they give me some real good critical thinking. They add to the scenarios. They tweak some details. Sometimes they think of another twist or two that we might be able to roll in and play it out. But it's really, at that point, becomes a group thought activity where we just try to get as much bang for the buck in an enjoyable way, because that's part of the reason that these simulations work so well is you actually, they have fun. There's this chance for people to argue and to argue their positions. And, in every case, there's always someone who has the strongest position, a secured creditor, a government with a big hammer, whatever it is, all the way down to people who have a really, really, really weak case. But those people with really, really, really weak cases have to be represented as well. And so there's a bunch of really good professionals who are really good of trying to make at least a little lemonade out of the lemons that they're handed. And so those are always some fun things to see too, right? See how those tactics play out. And, and again, because this is such an accelerated process, they can't delay things so long, but that's sometimes what they do in real life is they're just a fly in the ointment long enough that somebody wants to flick them some money to make them stop.
Yeah, to make them go away. Yeah,
and
I suppose they can actually try out things that they can't do on real cases, and see the kind of reactions they get as well.
Yeah, or they can try things they know don't work in real cases, and but are satisfying. So so there's a lot of that jousting that goes on, and that's what is kind of fun. And there are some genuine disagreements. There are people who just feel super strongly about how something should or shouldn't happen, or how it would or wouldn't happen, and it's instructive for that to play out, in front of everybody. I mean, everybody who's here, as you mentioned, they're fantastic people, they're fantastic professionals, and they're not shy.
Oh, that's great. So when's the Hollywood film of this coming? Got the script going.
Every year they pressure me to make sure it's the best one ever. So I don't know. There'll be some point where it's as bestest as it's going to be, and that'll be when the film comes. It is a great simulation for training, though. It really is. There are people every year who come who just have a toe in this water, and they come away with just a much deeper appreciation and understanding. It doesn't mean that they know everything, but they get exposed to a lot of things, and they get to meet the people that they can call for resources.
It's probably quite good for younger people coming up to sort of get a first taste of it as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it can be. They sometimes can be a little bit overwhelmed because you get somebody who's 30 years in who's aggressive and super not shy. And sometimes they can control a little bit of things. But we try to leave it open for people to ask questions. There's no such thing as a bad question. One of the things that you'll hear from me throughout this process is I have a ton of ideas, most of which are awful. And so I'll share them, and I don't mind being told this one's awful or that one's awful, or this one should be this way or that one should be this way. And that's the same thing that happens in this setting where, we have young people who ask some questions that maybe they should know or could know. That's a great chance to get them educated, and they aren't penalized for it.
Excellent. So if people want to get hold of you to ask any questions, where should they find you?
Well, they can always get me on LinkedIn. They can catch me at my email at raymondchip.hobecky@raymond.com. Either one of those things are fine. NAFER.org, NAFER.org. That's where you're going to find the sign up for this conference. And You'll also find some information in there on some of the logistics. Our room block rate is a pretty significant discount from the rack rate in Cayman that time of year. I think it's good for a few days before and after the conference. So, we have some folks who, they'll just jet down and they'll just laser locked on target, be there for the professional world. We have others who will bring their families, and they'll do a few family days before and a few family days after. So there's a lot of variety of folks. Again, if you are from someplace where it's cold that time of the year, it is not that hard to sell.
Yeah, I know, I can imagine. That's great, Chip. Thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Thank you for joining Chip for this podcast. If you want to get in touch with Chip or any of his guests, please contact him through the Raymond website, www.raymond.com, or on LinkedIn. All views expressed in this podcast are individual opinions and do not constitute professional advice. Thank you.